Your July tomato plant can look perfectly healthy while the next harvest is already slipping away. Green leaves, yellow flowers, green tomatoes hanging below. From a few steps back, it looks like success. But under the plant, yellow flowers are lying on the soil. That does not mean you neglected it. It may mean 3 hidden traps are running at the same time. One starts before the flower opens. One is hiding in the fruit you are proud of. And one looks exactly like good gardening. When a July tomato plant looks like this green, full of flowers, fruit already hanging below, most gardeners feel the same thing. The hard part is over. They water. They feed. They mist the leaves in the evening to take the edge off the heat. And every morning, more yellow flowers are lying on the ground. The healthiest looking tomato plant in July can be the one losing the most new fruit, because everything that makes it look healthy may also be running 3 traps against the next flowers. All 3 of these traps are invisible from the outside. All 3 can be running on the same plant at the same time while the plant looks perfectly fine. The first trap is inside the flower before it opens. The second trap is something you have been watching, grow, and feeling proud of every morning. The third trap may be something you are actively doing to help, and the more it appears to be working, the deeper it goes. This is not a failure of effort. Nobody told you that what worked in May and June could create all 3 of these traps by July. July changes the rules. Not for the plant, but for what the plant needs in order to hold on to new flowers. The first trap starts before the flower opens. It may already be happening in the clusters open on your plant right now. The flowers are there. You can see them every morning, yellow, open, ready. By the next morning, they are on the ground. No fruit started. No sign of why. A flower can open perfectly, look completely healthy, and still fail to set fruit because the pollen inside never left the anther. You have been doing what careful gardeners do. You have kept the plant watered. You have not let it wilt. You may have even been misting the leaves in the evening to bring the temperature down. None of that is wrong in principle. But July creates a condition that tomato pollen cannot work through, and most gardeners never know it is there. Tomato pollen needs relatively dry air to release and reach the stigma. When humidity climbs above 70%, the pollen absorbs moisture, clumps together, and sticks inside the anther. SDSU extension documents this directly. In high humidity conditions, pollen cannot escape. The flower opens. The stigma waits. But pollination fails before it ever begins. Evening misting to cool the plant may be raising the humidity around the flowers just enough to trap the pollen that needs to move the next morning. The leaves themselves can do the same thing. Dense foliage around a flower cluster holds humid air in place even without any misting at all. This morning, before the heat builds, look at each flower cluster above the fruit. If leaves are wrapping tightly around a cluster, remove 1 or 2. Not a hard pruning, just enough to let morning air reach the flower. And if you have been misting the plant at night, stop. Water at the base instead. But clearing the air only changes what is happening around the flower. It does not touch what is happening inside the plant where something has been quietly running since the first tomato formed. And you have been looking at it every single morning. Pick up one of those green tomatoes. Feel the weight of it. That weight is carbohydrate sugar the plant built during cooler weeks, when there was enough energy for everything. But above it, the new flowers are dropping. Every morning. While the fruit below keeps growing, the fruit below is old success. It is what the plant did in better conditions, with less competition. The flowers above are trying to become the next harvest, and right now, they are losing. You are looking at the right thing. You are feeling the right thing. But in July, that early success becomes the source of the problem for everything that comes after it. Developing fruit at the lower levels of the plant pulls between 85 and 90% of the total carbohydrate the leaves produce each day. Research from the Annals of Botany measured this directly. The fruit is the strongest energy demand on the plant. New flowers are the weakest. In that competition, the flowers lose every time. The plant is not abandoning the new flowers. It is finishing what it already started because in July heat, that is the only decision that makes biological sense. But those new flowers cannot afford to wait. And when nights stay above 70 degrees, the plant burns through most of what it built during the day just to survive until morning. By the time new flowers open, there may be almost nothing left for them. A tomato plant can look stronger than it has all season and still be producing fewer new tomatoes than it did in June. Go out today and check the bottom of every tomato on the plant. Any sign of pink or orange, pick it now. Removing it frees up the energy the plant was holding for fruit that no longer needs it and sends it toward the flowers still trying to hold on above. But that only solves part of the problem. The third trap is not about what is already on the plant. It is about something you may be adding right now, trying to help. The third trap is tied to the darkest green leaves on the plant. And the darker green the plant looks in July, the deeper it may be caught in this trap. Flowers are dropping. Fewer tomatoes are forming than last month. The natural response is to feed the plant, give it something, help it push through. So you fertilize. The plant gets darker green. New leaves push out. It looks like it is responding, and the flowers keep dropping. Adding fertilizer when flowers are dropping feels like the right response. But high nitrogen fertilizer in July may be creating the third trap while making the plant look healthier than ever. This is not a failure of instinct. Feeding a struggling plant is what careful gardeners do in May, in June, when the plant is still building. But in July, after the plant is already carrying fruit, nitrogen creates a different effect entirely. High nitrogen after fruit set activates vegetative growth. And excess nitrogen competes with potassium, the mineral the plant needs to support flowering and fruit development. When nitrogen dominates, leaves come first. The darker green your plant looks in July, the more likely it is caught in this third trap. Because that deep green is often nitrogen, and nitrogen right now is telling the plant to grow leaves, not hold flowers. Pollen trapped in humid air, old fruit pulling carbohydrate, new leaves pulling what remains. All three running at the same time on a plant that looks perfectly healthy from the outside. If you are currently feeding with high nitrogen fertilizer, stop for now, just until you see new flowers beginning to hold and set. That is the signal the plant has moved out of this trap. Three things break all of them, none of which require buying anything, none of which take more than 10 minutes. Open, unload, pause. None of this costs anything. None of this takes more than 10 minutes. And all three can be done today. Open. This morning, go out and look at each flower cluster above the fruit. Do not look at the flower. Look at the air around it. If leaves are wrapping tightly around a cluster, that cluster is sitting in trapped, humid air. Remove one or two of those leaves just enough to open a path so morning air can reach the flower during the window when pollen needs to move. And if you have been misting the plant in the evening stop, water at the base instead. A dry canopy in the morning gives pollen its only real chance. Unload. Check the bottom of every tomato on the plant, not the sides. The bottom. Any blush of pink or orange, pick it now. That fruit is biologically finished with the plant. It will ripen on the counter in 5 to 7 days. When you remove it, the plant redirects the energy it was holding for that fruit toward the flowers still waiting above it. You are not picking early. You are unloading freeing energy the plant was holding for fruit that no longer needs it. Pause. If you are feeding with high nitrogen fertilizer, stop this week. Not permanently, just until new flowers begin to hold and set. That is the signal the plant has moved out of this trap. Open the air. Unload the fruit. Pause the nitrogen. And then one more thing, 2 seconds per cluster, done before 10 in the morning. It goes further than opening the air alone. Take an old electric toothbrush, one you were about to throw away, or one sitting unused in a drawer. Go out at 9 in the morning, after the overnight moisture has dried, before the afternoon heat peaks. Hold the back of the brush against the stem behind each open flower cluster. Turn it on. Hold it for 2 seconds. UAF extension confirms the vibration frequency closely mimics a bumblebee's wing, the only bee that can sonicate a tomato flower and shake loose the pollen trapped inside the anther. 2 seconds per cluster. Done before 10. And it directly shakes loose the pollen that humidity has been trapping since dawn, the same way a bumblebee would if one visited your garden. Most gardeners in July have never thought of this. And what you need is sitting in your bathroom right now. Open the air. Unload the fruit. Pause the nitrogen. 2 seconds with an old toothbrush each morning. But some gardens do all 4 of these and still watch the flowers fall. If that is you, the reason is not above the soil. It is not in the air, not in the fruit, not in the fertilizer. You are not looking at a July tomato plant the same way anymore. Where you used to see green, you now read a signal, nitrogen levels, carbohydrate direction, whether the air around the flowers has had a chance to dry. Most gardeners never develop that, because the plant looks fine right up until the moment the flower is already on the ground. If you do all 4 of these and the flowers keep dropping anyway, there is a 4th reason. And it does not happen on any flower you can see. It is inside the pollen itself in a window 7 to 15 days before the flower ever opens. Heat stress during that window damages pollen at the cellular level. The flower opens and looks completely normal, but the pollen was already gone before you ever saw the bud. The next video covers exactly what happens during that window and why two gardens doing everything the same above ground can end up with completely different results by the end of July. One question before you go. Of the three traps, sticky pollen, fruit load, or green leaf, which one do you think is running on your plant right now? Leave it below. I read every one, because the most dangerous damage in July has no warning sign on the outside. It starts inside the pollen 7 to 15 days before the flower opens, and it is happening right now.